And then we started a new series a few weeks ago now called Unstuck. And this one is all about kind of seeing movement happen in our lives and really understanding that what we tend to do as we live through life is we kind of get into a rut and get stuck a little bit. We can get stagnant, and that can happen in a bunch of different areas of life. And when that happens, there's some things that we need to understand and know, and probably some decisions that we need to make in order to get unstuck. And that's what we've been talking about for the last few weeks now, and we're going to continue to do that over the next several. And here's kind of the big premise for us is we know that a lot of times when that stuck piece hits, usually there's some truth to understand that I need to learn or I kind of see it in a different way. And again, often there's a Band-Aid that needs ripped, right? There's a decision that needs made. And so we're trying to zero in on what are those decisions. When we look at different areas of life, right? When we look at, a few weeks ago, we talked about our body and being physically, what does it look like to get unstuck and to begin kind of moving things again and see some inertia start to build. Last weekend, we talked about what it means to get spiritually unstuck. And we took a look at the reality of baptism and what baptism means and kind of the symbol behind it. It was an awesome thing to behold. Right? A handful of you got baptized last weekend, which was super fun. Throughout the weekend, 12 people took the plunge while with their clothes on while it was like 10 degrees. And so good for you. If anybody has pneumonia, sorry. Right? Sorry about your luck. No, but it was an awesome thing just to watch people kind of make that decision and take that step forward, and a super powerful thing to do. And so what we want to do today is we want to take a look as we kind of look at the next aspect of what it means to be stuck. And we're going to look at what it means to be stuck relationally, right? What it means to be stuck relationally. And we're going to talk about different kinds of relationships. And there's no way to cover all of the different kind of relationships that we have, right? There's friendships, and there's romantic relationships, and work relationships, and parent-child, and family dynamic relationships, right? There's a lot of different kinds of relationships. And we're not going to be able to go deep down into every different kind of relationship and how we get unstuck in each of those. What we can do is look at a handful of truths and principles that kind of apply across the board in relationships. And I think at the end of the day, spending the time here is going to kind of bear the most fruit for us because I think the lion's share of what it means to be stuck lands in this conversation, right? So it's kind of what we're going to dive into today. I hope that we can see things a little different coming out of this conversation, and then I hope that each of us kind of walks away with a step to take to say, here's what it would mean for me to kind of rip the Band-Aid and have action play out in my life relationally and get unstuck there. Right? We've been looking at this verse over the last few weeks, kind of coming back to it each week. Jesus would have said this in John chapter 8, verses 31 and 32. He said, if you hold to my teaching, you're really my disciples. Then you'll know the truth, and the truth will set you free. And we want to keep coming back to this because there's a reality that I want to make sure we zero in on. That when we think about God and what he wants for his creation, for his children, he wants freedom for us. He wants us to get unstuck. And right, a lot of times we talk about God's will and what does God want? God wants freedom for us. That's why he told us the truth. And that truth is something that when we know it, when we understand, we can see it, it brings freedom. And that's the kind of freedom that we're going to be talking about here today and all throughout the series. And if you missed some of the other conversations, of course, you can catch up online if you want to do that. And we want to dive in today, though, really to this conversation around relationships. And I want to set it up on the whiteboard and set up some framing, and then we'll kind of dive into a few passages here that speak directly to it. And here's kind of what I think plays out in relationships most of the time. When I think about what gets in between relationships, when we think about the relationships in our lives, and when we describe stuck, let's talk about it from this vantage point. We're not talking about relationships that are kind of distant, and they're acquaintances that we might know or bump into. We're talking about relationships with people that we kind of live life with, right? They're the people that are closer, kind of in proximity to us, our spouse, or they might live in our home, they might be a brother or sister. And usually what happens is there's something in between us, and something's not right. right? There's a conflict, or there's hurt, or there's pain. And we look at what it looks like to get unstuck. We're trying to figure out, how do we move past whatever it is that's in between us, and how do we kind of find our way through it, is going to be the nature of this conversation. So when we're talking about this paradigm, what I want you to have in your head, right, and this is what I was thinking about this week even for me, I want us to think about that relationship, the one where I've got something to work out, or this is just not quite right. It feels like I might have something that I need to take action on. Maybe there's a thing to forgive, or maybe there's a conversation to have, or maybe there's an investment to make. It's not the kind of relationship that you've worked stuff out in the past and things are kind of fine right now. Sometimes relationships get complicated and difficult. That's not the one we're talking about, where you've done the work in the past and now it's kind of good. I'd say for that one, just leave it alone, right? Just enjoy where that is if it's at a place of peace. Then this is where, if you thought about it, as soon as we talked about stuck, there's probably a relationship that comes to mind. And here's the word that I think tends to go in the middle of kind of a stuck relationship. And here's the word that I think marks this. The word is fear. The word is fear. And here's why. Fear is it's a very powerful thing, right, in our lives. And when we think about what it looks like to move towards another person, often what's playing in the background are fears that we have about ourselves and fears about what it might look like to move towards a relationship. So fears like this, fears of being alone. Fears of being alone. So in the back of our minds, right, some of us are going to have that fear playing out, and we think to ourselves, man, I feel lonely, or I'm afraid of being left or rejected. Here's another one, rejected or abandoned. And maybe that has happened in the past, and because there's pain back here somewhere, that fear is going to cause me to interact with a relationship differently. I'm going to do some different things because these fears are kind of playing out in the background. Maybe I'm afraid of something that's happened in the past where I've been hurt, where I put my heart into a relationship, trusted a friend, or trusted a romantic relationship, and I got burned and I got hurt. And now when I go to interact in a new relationship, this fear haunts me in the background, right? And so the next time I go to move towards a relationship, I'm gun shy. I'm afraid. I don't know what's going to happen if I put my heart out there. I'm afraid of being alone. I'm afraid of being rejected. Right? Sometimes what happens is there's a fear of a difficult conversation that needs to happen. I'm afraid of confrontation. Afraid of confrontation, right? Where we know that in order for us to move forward, we got to talk about some stuff. This thing, that there's an elephant in the room, and if we don't square up and look at that thing together, we're just not going to be able to move forward, right? And that fear can become so paralyzing and so overwhelming. I don't want to have that conversation with my boss. I'm not bringing this up with my mom. There's zero possibility I'm going to have that conversation with my mother-in-law, right? Well, whatever it is, we will do almost anything to not go there. We'll quit the job, leave the relationship, move to Vegas, right? Whatever it takes to just not have the hard conversation. And guys, this is where it gets funny and kind of strange. Sometimes massive life decisions are made, all for the sake of not squaring off with this bubble right here. Change churches. Leave marriages, leave jobs. When the reality is my role in it, what was not to run away from it, it was to square up with the fear and actually to move towards it, right? That fear, that's why it's such a big deal. That fear is so massive And it shows up in so many different forms that I think it ends up being the primary reason we get stuck in relationship. Here's another one. Here's forgiveness and anger, and someone has hurt me, and now I'm left with the decision, do I forgive? And forgiveness is not the same decision as restoration, but just the decision to forgive from the heart and work through this process can create all kinds of fear and hesitancy. So I want us to think in this equation and to be honest. And when I look at my kind of what God is often doing in my heart and life, he's often asking me to move towards the fear, to move into it in order to find my way through it in relationship. As far as it depends on you, be at peace with all people, Paul says in Romans. Right? What do I have to do to move through it? Here's the thing. This isn't a guarantee that even if I move through the fear to the other side, that this is going to end in a healthy relationship. It's not a guarantee it's going to fix the marriage or fix my thing with my boss or my coworker or my brother or my neighbor that's mad about this one. Right? It doesn't mean that. What it means is I can have a clear conscience. And from my vantage point, I can be unstuck in this relationship. There's nothing left on my plate to do. I've done my part to enter into this and to deal with it. And often what happens is what God is doing in me is he's teaching me to believe in him in these situations and to square off with the fear that we find in our lives. Okay. Let me walk us into a passage I think brings enormous help to this equation and helps us to see it differently. Here's what we find in 1 John. John says this as an older man, right? He's elderly now, right? He says this is how love is made complete on the day of judgment. He says, in this world, we are like Jesus. He says, there's no fear in love, but perfect love drives out fear. Because fear has to do with punishment. He says, the one who fears is not made perfect in love. We love because he first loved us. Okay, so what John's going to tell us and what he's going to help us to see is this. That Jesus now enters this equation, right? And he says that really we want to become like the person of Christ and understand who he is and how he loves. Who he is and how he loves, right? And the reality is that as we look at this relationship, that the fact that Jesus moved towards us, he initiated relationship with us. He confronts us in love and out of concern for us. He offers to forgive us. He's willing to do that, right? Even at the risk, even when we hurt him and reject him and have the potential to leave him alone, he purposefully enters into relationship and moves past all that to have relationship with us. Well, what he does is he models and shows us and gives us and fires within our hearts something that we can't fire in our own hearts. And what that is perfect love. Perfect love. I can't generate this stuff, right? You hurt me, I want to fight you, right? That's right. I want to leave you, I want to fight you. What I don't want to do is be with you anymore. We're all kind of like that, right? Our natural instinct is not to move towards somebody who's harming me or who there's risk involved in the relationship. And the only way this is going to make sense is if I start to understand the security that I can have as a follower of Jesus, when I say yes to Jesus and I let him forgive my sins, that perfect love shows up in my life. This is why the Apostle Paul would pray and say, hey, I pray and I hope that you experience the love of Christ, which right, is beyond its height and its breadth and its depth. It's beyond measurement. I want you to understand that. And as that love shows up in your life, what happens is it compels me to move through the fear towards the person, towards the relationship. That posture, that stance is everything. Here's why. When I begin to understand and know that all of these fears are solved in some ways in my relationship with Jesus, that gives me the security to show up and to freely give in this relationship without needing something in return. See, now I can know I'm not alone and I won't be rejected. I have a God who will never leave me or forsake me. He has chosen to love me. I am in the family. All that security shows up. And now when I come here, this is huge, I don't need a boyfriend or a girlfriend or a boss or a stranger to see me a certain way or to respond to me a certain way or to make me feel like I'm going to be okay. There's not a need there. Does that make sense? I'm not showing up into the relationship needing something to come to me, trying to get something from it. I can show up into the relationship as a giver. What needs to happen in this relationship for us to move forward is we have to have a difficult conversation because that's actually the most loving thing that we can do is square off with this difficult thing. Think about when this has happened, if this has ever happened in your life, where somebody who cared about you, I'm not talking about being told off. I'm talking about when somebody cared about you and they moved towards you and they brought something up that was difficult and they did it for your benefit. How did you feel after that happened? At first, when this has happened in my life, at first it's painful, right? It's painful because you realize, there's a defensiveness and I don't want to deal with that because what about you, right? Whatever it is. But then eventually what happens is you start to realize this person is operating for my good. I actually feel loved by this. Not that many people have the guts to move through this to get to the hard conversation in my life. Not that many people have that. And when they do, it has felt very, very loving on the back end when somebody's made it here. When I understand the security I have in Christ, I can invest in the right kind of relationships without fear because I may be hurt and I may be rejected, but at the end of the day, I know that who I am and whose I am is set. It's fixed. I don't have to clamor for that and need it from another person. Because this is huge. This is huge. When I'm operating out of fear, I'm operating out of need. Not the good kind of need. When I'm coming to a relationship and I need you to accept me. I need you to think about me a certain way. I need you to fulfill all these needs in my life. What happens is that kind of desperation creates an equation where relationships really can't flourish. And so I need to find the solution for some of these things in Jesus so that I can move through fear towards people. Now, all throughout the Bible, we hear this, do not fear, don't be afraid, fear not. And what God is not saying, hey, it's a sinful thing for you to feel the feelings of fear. You and I on this planet are never going to outgrow feelings of fear that are going to show up in our experience. You can't be spiritual enough to not get afraid of stuff. We're still going to bump into that, right? When we think about putting ourselves out there or initiating relationship, we're still going to get butterflies and feel feelings of fear at times. If there's a difficult conversation, your palms might get sweaty. You're going to feel fear. The idea isn't that we never experience the feelings of fear. The idea is that when we bump into those, we work it out with Jesus and have him help us have his love show up in us and work through us to compel us and move us into loving people, right? Whatever that needs to look like in that situation. Guys, there are massive generational problems that could be solved with one difficult conversation. Just want you to think about that for a minute. That entire churches have melted and divided because sometimes one difficult, honest, humble conversation wasn't had. Marriages ended on this. Partnerships are broken. You name it. The relational breakdowns that show up across the board in our lives end up being affected by this picture. Now, we live in a broken, fallen world, and those things that I've just mentioned still can happen even if we do everything as with a completely clear conscience. So don't hear me. Don't hear me wrong. But man, what could happen and what more good and what more healing could play out if we let this piece fly in our lives? And guys, here's the thing. When I think about faith and what it means to be a person of faith, more and more, the longer I follow Jesus, the more I think about this picture rather than thinking about just like going to church or doing church stuff. Church stuff is important. Obviously, I think that. I'm a pastor, right? Stuff's important. It helps us grow, helps us move, helps us be consistent. But what does it help us to grow and be consistent in? It helps us to grow and become consistent in becoming people of love that move towards our fears. Proverbs says the righteous are as bold as a lion. Followers of Jesus are to be people that don't allow themselves to stay stuck too long in a relatively miserable relationship that I just don't want to work on it. I don't want to deal with it. It's more loving to move towards the difficulty, towards the investment, do the counseling, do the thing that scares me, rip the Band-Aid, because the possibility of health and healing, and for this thing, instead of fear, to be marked by love is worth it, right? It's worth it. And it's just what followers of Jesus do. More than being marked by a bunch of activities, Jesus said, "You will know my followers by their love." The kind of love that operates for the benefit of the person being loved, that risks, that invests, that puts their heart into it, that initiates, that walks across the room. This is it's a radically different way to live. You say, Ryan, what does it look like? Here in John chapter 1, we look at Jesus when we say that we need to become like Jesus. Here's what John 1:14 would say: the Word became flesh and made his dwelling among us. We have seen his glory, the glory of the one and only Son who came from the Father, full of grace and truth. And as I have relationship with Christ, I become like him a little bit at a time in a very imperfect way. And if that's the case, what does that look like? It means my relationships are going to be marked more and more by grace and truth. By grace and truth. And this grace and truth, this undeserved favor, which is what grace is I'm going to enter into relationship and see people through the eyes and the lens of grace. God has already pre-chosen to see this person with undeserved favor, beyond what they could earn or deserve. And there's a reality that there's some truth to whatever the dynamic is happening here in this relationship. And I'm going to apply grace and truth uniquely to a situation. So you want to have a great marriage. The best thing you can do is get to know Jesus, move out of fear towards love, and operate in grace and truth in your marriage. That's going to look different in every different season. right? And if you have infertility, it's going to look different. And when you have young children, it's going to look different. If you have a situation where somebody's ailing and their health, it's going to look different. Grace and truth. If you want, here, Ryan, give me the 5 great principles on how to love people and have a perfect marriage. Get out. I don't have that, right? There's no such thing. But what I can do is say, yeah, like Jesus, in the ballpark of what this person is like, undeserved favor and then a grasp of reality. And remember, the truth is what sets us free. I'm not set free by deception or living in la-la land. I got to get down to some truth. God made me and loves me, and he died to forgive me, and we have problems. That's the reality of being human, and there's grace. And when I can begin to see relationships from that perspective, I'm looking more and more like Jesus. People ask us a lot, do you have a position? You have a position about X, Y, and Z? You're like, we believe truth. We also have grace. So we're going to take grace and truth and apply it to a situation. Do you have a position on marriage and divorce and tell me this scenario and let's look at that individually, because there's a lot going on and grace and truth needs to show up in that situation. Well, do you know my background? Can we be absent? Grace and truth has to show up here. This is what it means to look like and become like the person of Christ, right? More and more. Guys, like I mentioned, the longer I go, the more I'm convinced that moving through this word, this fear word, by being like Jesus is what this thing's about. And we almost have to take the time to cut through it. You almost have to take the time to cut through all the religious stuff that we're used to hearing about. Was it about going to church a lot? Yeah, I mean, church is helpful, right? Yeah, good. Is it about being a good person? Is it about doing a lot of busy things? Okay, let's talk about our relationships. How do we interact with humans? Like at home and at work and with our neighbors. Hallelujah, we love Jesus. Now get out of my way and give me my parking spot. Okay? You're like, that's a little too close to home, right? That one kind of hurt a little bit. Yeah, I love you, Jesus. I love you. I will sit in my car and fight you to be 7 feet closer to the building, right? It's like funny and not funny, right? This is where, right, I'll do whatever you want, but don't make me have a hard conversation. I'll serve it this thing. Awesome. Don't make me square up with my insecurities. If I want to get unstuck, guys, the fruit is in the hard stuff. That's where the good stuff is. It's all the way down, and these things have terrified me. I've lost sleep over them in my own life. And I continue to have to face them. There's never going to be an outgrowing the fear. God is going to call me into this fear. Why? Why does he do it? Why do I have to find myself in difficult relationships or awkward moments or where I got to put my heart out there over and over again? Here's why. It's in the middle of that fear. That is where we become like Jesus. That's where we learn it. That's where Jesus on display happens. That's where I understand again in a fresh and new way. When I'm looking at forgiving somebody, I understand all in a new light how much Jesus has forgiven me. When I'm terrified about being rejected again, I realize all in a fresh way how deeply accepted I am and that I will never be rejected by him. Over and over again, I can see when I'm looking to have a confrontation, I can see that God has loving confrontations with me because he loves me and he wants what's best in my life. It's not because he's trying to bring pain to me. It's in the middle of this thing. That is where growth happens. That is where Christ-likeness happens. And at the end of the day, what Jesus is looking to do is he's looking to help me become this a little bit every day. It's powerful. Say, Ryan, what do I do with all this? Super good question. Again, we can't apply this in every scenario. Here's a couple scenarios that I want to bring up. Here's the first one. If you're in the middle of a super difficult thing, if you have a conflict, if you have forgiveness and that you need to work through and you've been hurt deeply, maybe you were hurt in your last church, or there was a breakdown, or your family is a total wreck, right? There's a lot going on. It's complicated. Guys, the thing that I would encourage you to do is go back and watch this series called Resolve, where we take weeks and weeks and weeks to talk through conflict resolution from God's perspective. Okay? Take the time, make the investment. It will help you. Some of you were around then for that conversation. Some of you weren't. If you're there, go back and look at it and listen. Listen to the whole thing before you do anything. Right? You want to understand the whole process and hear God's heart for it. If you're here today and you're married, let me talk to you for a minute. If you showed up here and your marriage is on the rocks, and you might even be considering throwing in the towel, I'm going to ask you for one favor. Don't quit until you invite a third party in. Call me, call a Christian counselor, let us know. However you want to do it, just get help from a follower of Jesus that is skilled in this area. Have the conversation. Don't try to figure it out just the two of you. Right? If you're married today and you say, man, my marriage is not on the rocks, but we're not in a very good place. The passion's gone. It's not great. Here would be my encouragement to you. Do whatever it takes to move through the fear. Move towards each other in love. Invest in that thing. Do the counseling. Go to the seminar. Get the help. Do radical. Because listen, a great marriage is worth having if you can fight for it, right? Because if you're in the middle of something difficult like that and you just need a conversation, reach out. Most of these things need a look where you can apply grace and truth in a specific and an individual way. You can talk about those with your life or your community leaders. You can talk about it with our staff. We'd love to help you in any way we can. Reach out. Let us know. Finally, guys, for all of us, the key to this whole equation, I believe this with all my heart, the key to this whole equation is this circle right here. The more I experience and know the love of Jesus for me, the more I know what he's like and what perfect love even looks like, the more I have a hope of doing some imperfect version of this. Right? This one. See, you know, guys, if you've been around, I didn't grow up with this. And I was terrified as a young adult, terrified of marriage, didn't believe in it, terrified of what I would become as a parent. Because my dad left, my parents split when I was very, very young. Didn't grow up with my biological dad. So when I looked at the path forward of how do I do marriage and how do I do family, do I even know how to do friendship, it was a little overwhelming. And somebody helped me know, they said, listen, basically said this to me, the thing that you need to do more than anything else is get to know how this person loves you. You know this, you're going to know how to have a marriage, and you're going to know how to be a dad, and you're going to know how to be a friend. Go here, right? Guys, if you're here today and you don't have that relationship yet, you might have church, you might have grown up in church, and you might have been around it all, but you've never received the relationship that Christ has died to give you. Never been forgiven for your sins and said, I'm in. I want that. I want to be made new on the inside. You can make that decision today. That this could be day one. All you have to do is simply just ask. It's simple. It's not easy. It's terrifying, but it's simple. Jesus, I'm in. Will you forgive me? Your heart to his. And it's literally just a decision to make. Nobody can make it for you. Your mom can't. Your grandma can't. Your dad can't. You gotta make that. Right? You rip the Band-Aid, and you're new. And we have a shot at some of this playing out in our lives. Some of us here in the room that made that decision last week. A few of you, a handful of you made that decision, and then you went forward in baptism. You said, I'm in on that. The transformation that I died to my sin and I was buried. The old me is dead and the new me is raised, and the picture that baptism makes. You said that I want to make that public. I'm in. And you accepted Jesus, and then you got baptized all kind of in one big motion, right? Some of you said, hey, I want to get baptized because I want to say, I've known this and believed this for a long time, but I've never made it public, and I'm going to rip the Band-Aid and do that. Right? We had this week, a handful of people came to us and said, hey, Ryan, you offered to us to get baptized, and we were sitting there, and we wanted to, and then we just didn't. Said, can we get baptized, this Sunday? And we said, it's too late, man. You missed your chance. We didn't say that. We said, of course, right? Of course. And so last service, we made the same invitation. We're not going to do this every week, guys, okay? So, unless we have to. Whatever. Right? We're not going to do this every week. This is special. So if you're new, it's not normal for us. To do this, but 6 people came up and with their clothes on said, we're in for Jesus. A dad and 2 sons did it together. It's super powerful. We're going to make the same invitation. If you want to get baptized today, some of you were sitting here last week or watching online and you thought, I want to do that and I'm terrified, and then the music ended and you thought, I wish I would have done that. Here's chance number 2, okay? And listen, there's zero pressure. This is you and Jesus stuff. And if you want you and Jesus stuff to happen in a way that's public with the church family, we would love to celebrate that with you. Okay? So I'm going to be right up here, and if you want to get baptized and make that decision today, you can. We'll talk, we'll sing and worship. And then when the first song ends or the second, I'll come up and we'll baptize you. Right? Otherwise, we'll sing and worship and have the band come out and pray. The key thing is we want to move. We want to rip the Band-Aid. Whether it's having a tough conversation or moving towards somebody in a relationship, but it all has to start here. Moving towards Jesus as he has moved towards us. As the band comes out, would you bow your heads and close your eyes with me and pray and sing together. Lord, we just stand in awe. of who you are. Lord, your word says that you are love. You act over and over and over again solely for our benefit. It's your idea to forgive, your idea to come here, your idea to make your truth known, your idea to build a body of people, a group of people that would model your love imperfectly but consistently. Lord, would you help us to be changed by your love more and more? God, move us through fear. Raise us above fear. Call us out of fear. God, make us people who are courageous and brave because we are marked by your name. I pray that you would work in our hearts today, Lord, in powerful ways. Meet us here, even now.